back to CFB Cauldron Live. I'm Bubba Wagamuth, and thank you so much for watching our 5th live show now. I want to start off with a few housekeeping things tonight. So first off, obviously we didn't have a live show last week. Hurricane Ian was kind of coming through our area. We were having power surges on and off, so just decided to skip last week, get back into the rhythm this week. Unfortunately, the hurricane also ruined our plans to head up to State College to watch Penn State last weekend. They take on Northwestern. We weren't able to make it. Our flight got moved back to Friday night, and then the storm went through Charlotte, which was our connecting flight, so it just wasn't going to be possible last week with the weather here in Northeast Florida. But I am excited tonight to announce that not this weekend, but the following weekend, I'm heading to Virginia Tech for the first time. I'm going to go watch Miami take on the Hokies up in Blacksburg. It's going to be my first time up there. Lane Stadium is obviously a bucket list place for me to go. Super stoked to head up there and take in everything that Virginia Tech has to offer. So we're going to start tonight's show a little different than we usually do. Typically what we do, if you've watched before, you know we do game recaps from the previous week, and then we head into our bets and then most anticipated matchups. This week, we're going to change it up a little bit. So we're going to start off with head coaching vacancies, and not only head coaching vacancies, but we're going to do best available candidates for each job. But before we do that, I just want to talk about a little bit about what a modern day head coach has to do. So as the sport adapts, the head coaching position adapts as well. I think there's 6 things that a head coach has to do in modern day college football. That's going to be recruit, which is pretty self-explanatory. One that's newer is manage the transfer portal. You're at a new school. You don't have the players that you would like, most likely, so you have to get an influx of talent. And the best way to do that is go out into the portal, find kids that fit your scheme, fit your system, fit your needs, more importantly. Next thing you have to do is develop that talent. No matter what kind of talent you have on that roster, you have to get the best out of every single player on that team, and that's your responsibility as the head coach. The next one is obviously coach, which you think is the most important. Nowadays it's not, but it's the X's and O's. It's whether you bring in your scheme, whether you try to get personnel to fit your scheme, whether you tailor your scheme to the players on the roster when you take over. There's a lot that goes into coaching, not as much as it used to, but X's and O's is still a big part of coaching, and your philosophy as a coach is a big part of coaching still. The next one is going to be you have to be the CEO of a program. Like I said, this kind of ties in with the first 4. You're in charge of the roster management. You're in charge of day-to-day operations. You're in charge of coaching. You're in charge of your staff. There's a lot that goes on there's the plate for a college head coach is bigger than ever. You're in charge of more things than ever. There's a lot that you have to do as a college head coach. So being the CEO and the face of your program is important in hiring a head coach nowadays. And the last one is always be adapting, always be adaptable. Be able to change with the sport, because the sport's changing day by day. We see 5 years ago you would have never known what the transfer portal is. Nowadays it's an integral part of roster building. So being able to use the portal, not only use the portal but adapt to whatever the sport offers next is going to be huge. I think it's important quality for a head coach to have when taking over a program. So with that out of the way, we're going to go, there's 5 head coaching jobs available. We're going to go job by job. The first one we're going to go with is Colorado. So Colorado, 0-5 start the season. They fire Carl Durrell. They have all the rest of this season and then the beginning of the offseason find their next coach. I think there's 2 guys that Colorado needs to be looking at. The first one is Bronco Mendenhall, the former Virginia and BYU head coach. Bronco is notorious for turning programs around and getting them heading in the right direction. Example of that is the 6 years prior to Bronco being at Virginia, the Hoos were 26-45. The first 6 years that Bronco was at Virginia, they're 36-38. And you also have to take into account that his first year they went 2-10. So that makes that record look a lot different. They look like they're 2 games underneath 500, but his last 5 seasons, every single season they were 500 or better during the regular season. And they won the Coastal Division of the ACC in 2019, which is a big step for Virginia. So Bronco Mendenhall has shown he has the ability to turn these programs around. I think you have to call him if you're Colorado. He's worked in the region before. He's worked on the West Coast. I think that would be a great hire for the Buffs. Another one, who isn't nearly as known as Bronco Mendenhall, is going to be Ryan Walters. You may or may not know who Ryan Walters is. If you don't, that's fine. Ryan Walters is the defensive coordinator for Illinois. And he's a young guy, so he played at Colorado. He played defensive back at Colorado. His dad played at Colorado. His first job after college was a graduate assistant with, you guessed it, with Colorado. So there's a lot of ties there, but that's not the reason they're going to hire him. What have you done for me lately? All he did was go to Illinois last season and completely turn that defense around. So 2020, the year before Ryan Walters got the job at Illinois, the Illini were 98th in points per game allowed in the whole country. So not good, bottom half of the country. Walter's first year was 2021, and the Illini had a big jump from 98th all the way up to 29th in points per game allowed. This year, another big jump. Right now, Illinois is third in the country in yards per game allowed, and they are first in the country in points per game allowed in 2022. So Ryan Walters, year before he got there, 98 in points per game allowed. First full season, 29th, and right now they're first, which is a massive, massive, massive jump year over year. So Ryan Walters, he's a young guy. He's only 36. He's shown the ability to be an elite defensive coach. You get that young youth energy into your program, and with a great defensive mind, I think that'd be a slam dunk hire for Colorado. I also think he's obviously comfortable with the program. His family has history there. He has history there. I think either of those two would be a slam dunk hire for the Buffs. So, next one we're going to talk about is Wisconsin. This would probably shock more people heading into the season than the other four. The other four you could see happening at some point in the season. I don't think a lot of people thought Paul Chryst was going to get fired heading into the season, but you start out 2-3 with a few bad losses, and that's big-time college football nowadays. So the first one is pretty obvious. It's going to be Jim Leonhard, and it's obvious because he's been rumored to kind of be the head coach in waiting for a little bit now, and now he's the interim head coach. So if you don't know anything about Jim Leonhard, he played at Wisconsin. He walked on the football team, became a great safety, played in the NFL 10 years, came back after he retired from the NFL. 2016, he joined the staff as the defensive backs coach. 2017, became the defensive coordinator. And that same year, subsequently, the team went 13-1 and won the Orange Bowl. So Jim Leonhard is a great defensive mind. Last season, the Wisconsin defense finished fourth in the country in points per game allowed, which was up there in the top 5, obviously. He's a great defensive coach, and there's no question about that. What we need to see from Jim Leonhard now is how does he turn this team around in the next 7 games. He has a tryout, unlike these other candidates. Jim Leonhard has the opportunity to go out there and show the administration, show the athletic department what he can do as the head coach. So Jim Leonhard, probably the leader in the clubhouse. I haven't checked the odds, but if I had to bet, Jim Leonhard would be the favorite. Another one who I haven't heard too much for the Wisconsin job, but I think would be a great fit is Tom Herman. So Tom Herman, former Houston, former Texas head coach. Tom Herman brings something that Wisconsin needs desperately, and that's offense. This, as you know, I just told you that Wisconsin was fourth in the country last year in points per game allowed. They still went 8-4 because the offense was abysmal. So Wisconsin needs an injection of life on the offensive side of the football. No one better to do that than Tom Herman. Another reason why Paul Chryst is out, in my opinion, was his lack of recruiting. The recruiting for Wisconsin has really been tailing off the past few seasons. Right now, the Badgers sit in the mid-50s for the 2023 class. And Tom Herman has a pretty good record as a recruiter. So go back and look at his years at Texas. 2017 was his first season, so we'll give him a pass then. But 2018, he finished third in the 247 Sports recruiting rankings. 2019 finished third, and then 2020 finished 8th. So not only can Tom Herman inject some life into this Wisconsin offense, I think he also improved the recruiting efforts of the school. So that's a name to keep an eye on at the current moment. And then probably the most obvious option besides Jim Leonhard is Lance Leopold. He won multiple national championships at Wisconsin Whitewater. You know what he did at Buffalo. You know what he did at Kansas. So Lance Leopold, if you can get him, that's a slam dunk. I just think he's going to be a hot commodity this offseason. There may be a bigger job than Wisconsin that may even call for him. So those are the 3 names I have for Wisconsin. Next school we're going to go to, Nebraska, and they actually share a common candidate with Wisconsin. The name that you need to be focused on if you're a Nebraska fan is Lance Leipold. Like I just mentioned with Wisconsin, he turned Kansas around in 1 season. Last year, Kansas went 2-10. This year, they're 5-0 and undefeated in conference play currently. They have College Game Day there this week. They have a big game against TCU. Nebraska, I think, is in a little different situation than Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin just needs a little bit of a, like I said, injection of life on the offensive side of the ball. Hopefully, you can keep Jim Leonhard as the DC if you do hire an offensive-minded head coach. I think Nebraska, you need to tear down to the studs. You need a complete program rebuild. You need to change a culture. You just need to start Nebraska football. Old Nebraska football died when you fired Scott Frost. It's going to start whenever you hire that next head coach. I think tearing the program down to the studs, I don't think there's anyone better at that right now than Lance Leipold. He's shown that he can do it at Buffalo. He did it at Kansas, which is probably the worst Power 5 job when he got it. So I think that's the first guy you call. Like I said, he's probably going to be a hot commodity this offseason, though. So I think the next name you call is Matt Campbell from Iowa State. Feels like Matt Campbell has been rumored for almost every single job available for the past few years. But Matt Campbell's still at Iowa State. And like I said, you want someone that can rebuild a program. So the 7 years before Matt Campbell was the head coach of Iowa State, The Cyclones went 32-55, and Matt Campbell's on year 7, so he's about 6.5 years in. He's 45-34 as the Iowa State head coach, so he's 10 plus games over 500 at Iowa State. Before the regimen before him was 20 plus games under 500. So I think that can show that Matt Campbell has shown the ability to not only build a program but maintain somewhat of a model of consistency. I think a lot of people think that the resources and the recruiting base is pretty similar at Nebraska and Iowa State, but Nebraska probably has an edge in booster, fan base, resources that are offered the head coach. So if you strike out on Lance Leipold, I don't think too many Husker fans would be upset with the Matt Campbell hire. He's shown the ability to build a program, which I think Nebraska needs. The next one, this one's probably the most interesting out of all 5, in my opinion. I think Georgia Tech is one of the better jobs available. The reason why natural recruiting ground is much better than the other 4 positions that are open currently. Arizona is pretty good, but I think outside the Atlanta area, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of 4 and 5 stars about an hour and a half drive away from Atlanta. So this is a big hire for Georgia Tech. And that's why I think you bring in a big name. I think that name's Deion Sanders. His name's been rumored for this job for a little bit now. But there's I have a lot of notes here why Deion Sanders would be a good fit at Georgia Tech. So one is his recruiting ability. So last year at Jackson State, an HBCU, FCS level school, he signed a better class than FAU, which is in South Florida, which is abysmal, Hawaii, Akron, Eastern Michigan, and Ohio. And he did that with only 8 commitments. And if you follow recruiting, you know how hard it is to have a highly rated class with only 8 commitments. And just to put it in perspective, Jackson State's average player ranking last year for the 2022 cycle was 90.73, which is a composite 4-star recruit. Their average recruit was a low-level 4-star, which is insane at a HBCU. Couldn't imagine what he would do at a school like Georgia Tech with all that talent around you. I think Deion, like I mentioned earlier, I think a head coach has to be the CEO of a program. I think Deion does that just as well as anyone in the country. I think Deion knows he has to utilize the transfer portal. Deion knows he has to be the face of the brand, and I think he's totally comfortable doing that. Deion played in Atlanta. The Atlanta fan base would love him. He would invigorate the boosters. He'd invigorate the fan base. There would be excitement about Georgia Tech football again, which I think they need. And the last note that I have is, why not? You're a 3-9 football team. Even if Deion crashes and burns, which I don't think he will, because I think he's a better coach than people give him credit for, not only as a coach, X's and O's, but the ability to run a program, I think he'll excel at. But if it crashes and burns, let's say it does, I think you may be better off after Deion than you were before Deion, just because of the amount of talent that would be on the roster. Now, that talent could leave via portal, but I don't think everyone's going to leave. So I think it's important to have a guy that can kind of keep some of the recruiting base at home. You have schools like Alabama, you have Georgia, who's down the road, coming in just taking kids from the Atlanta area or outside the Atlanta area. I think getting a guy like Deion, you'll get a good bit of those kids. You'll get kids like Jahmyr Gibbs, but you'll get them at a more frequent rate than you would under a guy like Jeff Collins. So I think Deion would be a slam dunk hire for Georgia Tech. If Deion doesn't work out for whatever reason, maybe Deion holds out for a Florida State or a bigger job. I think Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina would be a great hire as well. Jamie Chadwell led them from an FCS program into an FBS program. Jamie Chadwell has constantly improved year after year, and everyone remembers the 2020 season where they went undefeated in the regular season, beat BYU. I think what he brings is he brings a system offense, much like we see at Wake Forest. Everyone knows about that Wake Forest slow mesh offense. I think that kind of triple option, spread, multiple kind of style offense that Jamie Chadwell would bring to Georgia Tech would work out pretty well in the ACC. So that's another name to keep in mind for the Georgia Tech job. Last job, which I think is probably the least attractive of all of them, is Arizona State. And you do have a pretty good natural recruiting base. Arizona has plenty of high school talent. You're not that far from California. But I just think the state that the program's in currently and what you're looking at in the near future makes it the least attractive job. So you're in the Pac-12 one, which may be it's a dying conference at its current rate. You also have looming NCAA punishments coming down the road from what Herm Edwards and his staff did over COVID. There's a lot of roster turnover. I think they have more roster turnover than everyone besides Hawaii last season. It's a tough job. I think it's a complete rebuild. I think it's a lot like that Georgia Tech job probably after Paul Johnson left. Jeff Collins didn't have an easy job at Georgia Tech. I think this is going to be similar. And so 2 names I have. I think Bronco Mendenhall, who I mentioned earlier for the Colorado job. And I think it would be a slam dunk hire for Arizona State. He's shown the ability to turn a program around multiple times. And then Kalani Sitake would be a massive get. He's done great things at BYU. They've really started to hit their stride the past few seasons. I don't know if either of those guys would want to go to Arizona State. Now, I've read a lot from Arizona State writers, local writers, throwing some crazy names out there like Matt Rule, Tom Herman, Kalani Sitake. I think their sights are very, very high for a program that isn't in a great state currently. Now, it is a Power 5 job, but you're in a conference that's dying. I don't know who they get. This is not only is it the least attractive job, I think it's the most interesting. I think it's going to be really fun to see who they end up getting at the end of the cycle. So that's all 5 teams. I gave you my thoughts, gave you some candidates for the head coaching position. Now we're going to move into something new, actually. So we're at the point of the season now. We know what teams are for the most part. There's some teams that could turn it around, but we know what teams are. So once a week, I'm just going to give you a team that I think is in trouble of having a very subpar season, or maybe not this team particularly, but being in trouble of maybe coaching change or firing coordinators. They're just not in a great state right now as a team and as a program. And the first one, and teams in trouble is what I'm calling it. Our first team in trouble this season is Michigan State. So a lot of people watched that Washington game. Washington was undefeated at the time. Michigan State was undefeated at the time. And you just remember Washington blowing Michigan State out of the water. And you probably haven't watched them since, which is completely fine because Michigan State looked very uncompetitive against Washington. Since then, they've lost 2 games. They got smacked by Minnesota at home, and the game last week at Maryland wasn't particularly close either. So right now, Michigan State sits at 2-3. They are 0-2 in conference play. And after last year, they re-signed their head coach to a 10-year, $95 million contract. So Mel Tucker's not getting fired. I don't think they can afford to fire him. If this goes really, really south, Mel Tucker's your coach no matter what. I think the most concerning part of Michigan State is their lack of improvement. So last year, a lot of people know how bad their secondary was. Well, the defense as a whole right now is 101st in the country in yards per game allowed. Now, last year, their offense was pretty good. You had Jalen Naylor, Jaden Reed, Payne Thorne. That offense passing attack was pretty solid. This year, in total offense, they're 92nd in the country in yards per game on offense. So not only is the defense not performing very well, neither is the offense. And the worst part about it is their upcoming schedule. So you have Ohio State at home this week. Next week you have Wisconsin at home. Then you have 2 tough road games. You travel to Michigan, and then you travel to Illinois, who's hitting their stride right now. Michigan State could be looking at 2-7 here if they don't turn things around quickly. Now, can Mel Tucker fix the defense? I'm not sure, because if he would fix the defense, I think there would have been a big leap of improvement in that secondary at minimum, not even the front 7, in the secondary from last year to this year. So it's going to be interesting to see Michigan State going forward. How do they rebound? Can they stay competitive against Ohio State? I think the line right now is sitting around 27. I mean, is it going to be the bloodbath that we anticipate? Or are the Spartans going to go out there and put on a good performance at home, which I really think they need as a program. But yeah, Michigan State's my first team in trouble. They have a tough schedule coming up. The offense has gotten worse from last year. The defense isn't much better. So just keep an eye out for Michigan State the rest of this season. So we're going to jump into our Week 6 bets now. We didn't do bets last week because we didn't have a show, so I didn't want to put any bets out. But Week 4 we did have some. I don't have the graphic currently. But Week 4 we had a good week. We went 3-2. Really close to going 4-1. But win some, lose most, I guess. So we are heading into Week 6. I like the board this week. We have 2 high-octane offenses going against each other. 2 good, really good quarterbacks with Aiden O'Connell and Tulia Tagovailoa. It's also good weapons. You have Charlie Jones, Dante Demas, Jacob Copeland, Raheem Jarrett. I expect this game to go over 60 points this weekend, so give me the over on Purdue and Maryland. Utah at UCLA, I'm going to hold off on that one a little bit because we're going to talk about that one later. North Carolina, Miami. So I have North Carolina +4, -115. I made that before I knew that a lot of Hurricanes were playing. So it looked like Miami may be down to 1 scholarship running back. We figure out they're at 3 today. Mario Cristobal came out during a press conference and told us who's playing this weekend, who's not. I also thought Tyreek Stevenson may be out. Turned out he's playing as well. So +4, I don't love it as much as I did yesterday. This would have been my bet of the week yesterday if I figured out a lot of these guys weren't playing. Turns out more Hurricanes are healthy than I thought. I still like Carolina +4, though. I mean, North Carolina runs a similar offense to Middle Tennessee State. We saw how good Miami was at stopping that. So give me the Tar Heels +4 here. I really like UConn. I like what they did last week against Fresno State. They beat a great quarterback last week, Jake Haener in Fresno. So give me the Huskies -5 here against the Panthers. And then FSU at NC State, give me the Wolfpack -3. That's going to be -115 bet. I like that bet at home in Raleigh. So now we're going to move on to our top 3 matchups of the weekend. We do this every weekend, or I guess every week we do this for the upcoming weekend. So we're going to start with number 3. Number 3 is going to be TCU at Kansas, college game day. So if you haven't watched Kansas, they're a lot of fun to watch on both sides of the football this year. But what I'm going to be looking for this TCU team is, are they going to be able to run the football? Because last week, Kansas held Iowa State under 1 yard per carry, while TCU ran for 9 yards per carry nearly against Oklahoma. So is TCU able to replicate the ground production they had against Oklahoma last week, or is this Kansas defense going to stifle the TCU run game? And then Kansas, I want to see their offense bounce back. You have Devin Neal, you have Jalen Daniels. There's talent on that offense, which is weird to say about Kansas, but there's talent on that offense. You have dynamic playmakers. They didn't have a great outing last week. Can they bounce back against this TCU defense? It looked pretty stingy last week against Oklahoma. So, and also, the winner of this game, I think, is a serious contender in the Big 12. TCU would be 2-0 in conference. Kansas would be 3-0 in conference with a win. TCU already has Oklahoma out of the way, which is a big check mark. I think that the winner of this game is not only a contender to kind of knock off a few teams at the top of the Big 12, I think they're a contender to potentially win. So that's going to be a fun matchup to watch this weekend. Also, college game day, I think I mentioned that. Utah at UCLA. So I'm looking for Utah. How does this Utah offense look without Brant Kuithe? So Brant Kuithe is a Utah tight end, was their best weapon the Florida game if you watched it, led the team in receptions, yards, catches. How does this Utah offense look without him? They didn't play without him last week, but I think this UCLA team's better than the Oregon State team they played last week. Now on the other side of the football, we're going to be looking for Dorian Thompson Robinson. He's been in college for 40 years now. How is he looking against this stingy Utah defense? This will be a fun Pac-12 matchup to watch this weekend. And then the game I'm looking forward to most this weekend is going to be Tennessee at LSU. It's the first time we've had this game in Baton Rouge since 2010. Excited to watch this Tennessee offense, this LSU defense. So right now, LSU is 39th in the country in defensive pass efficiency, which is top half. It's a pretty good number. But Tennessee is second in offensive pass efficiency. So can LSU stop the Tennessee passing attack? And then on the flip side of the football, LSU is in the 70s right now in offensive pass efficiency. But Tennessee is almost dead last in that defensive category. So LSU, can they get the passing game going? And can LSU slow down this Tennessee offense? That's what I'm going to be looking for watching this game this weekend. So that's why it's going to be my most top anticipated matchup of the weekend. That's actually all we have for everyone tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in or watching after the fact. If you feel free to drop a comment if you want me to talk about anything, talk about any certain team. If you want to get in contact with me directly, the email is going to be cfbcauldron@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram, Twitter, leave a comment. It's just going to be at CFB Cauldron on both of those. So I'm going to get out of here. Looking forward to watching the SMU UCF game. Gus Malzahn, Rhett Lashley. It's going to be fun.